Okay, friends, we will need to go on. I will remind you of the fact that there is one more lecture on the Forest Clyde YouTube channel. You will find more exercises there. We're now heading to our last report in this section. We will talk about torture and war crimes as the tools aimed at destroying the society in the war of totalitarianism and dictatorship against democracy. And now I'm inviting Olenu Podolyan from Forepost.
Тут, мабуть, ще сьогодні не було нікого з
I
таким.
think you never had such a short person here today. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. I'll have to jump a little bit here to the microphone. We had some wonderful reports here, a lot of clinical context. And that all leads to the discussion that I was planning for you. I will start from a bit of philosophy, and I hope that you will ask questions actively and probably share some of your ideas on what I'm going to speak about. I would really want to have more of a conversation. Can I help you? Oh, great. Yeah. Speaking of tools, it's all here. Now you will be able to hear me well. Modern civilizations. This is a serious topic, honestly. So, modern civilizations have to ground themselves in the law. We have come to such stage of development when we have international documents, and we think that we are pretty well developed. And the more people support some kind of a rule, the more serious it is, and the more serious are the consequences for those who break the rules. But there is a reverse process. People break the rules and they use more and more intricate ways to do it and avoid consequences. Torture are crimes against people as understood in the International Convention on Torture. We remember their definition, but I will just remind you of that. These are any actions that are intentional and they bring strong pain or suffering to a person with the aim of punishing that person or the third party, intimidate or force this person. This can be inflicted by the state, by the people in authority, or other institutions who act as official institutions or can be supported by them or covered by them silently. So, the definition is very cumbersome, don't you think? I know it all, but when I'm reading this definition, I completely lose the track. However, we're actively using this definition. It's the International Convention Against Torture. It's important that we understand what's wrong with it and what's missing from here. Today, what we see is that the perpetrators make public their crimes and their consequences. What do you think is their goal? They used to be prone to hiding that. Now they are openly demonstrated. I'm talking about torture in the situation of war. The subjects are military personnel or civilians. Yeah, that's true. But there is a problem. We can't come to court, national or international courts, and say so. We have to prove it. How can we prove it? Okay, it's a tool, but if we get into more of a clinical context, how do we prove it? Yes, through consequences, and we need to show long-term consequences. as seen in the psychological worldview, social life, that have importance for the people around, how people change in behavior, in understanding themselves, and so on. Can you imagine how much work that is to show it all? Yeah, that's a lot of work. And we need to do a lot to prove it. And here we need to remember that we need to document it in a proper way. Whatever we can document now, because people aren't always ready to talk. And this is normal. This is how it is supposed to be. We need to document the facts that will link us to the words said by the leadership of the Russian Federation and what we hear from the military person, what we hear from occupation forces. But basically, we know that this can be any people who received the mandate for violence. This can be the military or whoever. They're just using the resources of the Russian Federation. What are the consequences going to be if we have the stream of crimes and there is no punishment?
Тобто ми з вами, ми безпосередньо зараз ми з вами, ну от я,
That is to say that you and I and all of us are becoming someone who regularly is affected by traumatic experiences, traumatic influences. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find this recording of the program. It's very unpleasant to watch this program, and they do not provide you with an opportunity to find the spot that you need very quickly. But these days, on this television program, there was an interesting comment on how Putin failed to understand the boy from Sevastopol. It's a very important point, and I will add this as a remark. This has nothing to do with torture. I just wanted to illustrate that the people who would like to act according to law, that is to say, I assume, theoretically speaking, that professionals in Dosh organization, I just assume, I don't have any evidence to confirm that, but I would simply like to say that sometimes people who want to comply with the law lose common sense when war crimes keep being committed all the time and there is no punishment for that. So in that program, our Ukrainian boy came out up front and he said something to Putin. I don't remember what exactly they said because I just heard a sound bite. And this was something that Putin knew very little about, like Bitcoins or TikTok. And he asked this question, and he asked, do you know what that is? And Putin said, yes, I know. And in the answer to this question, there was complete nonsense. And that doesn't matter. That's beyond the point. But the point is that the presenters on Dosh, they never introduced this boy, our boy, never named him. They never identified his legal status. They failed to mention that this is the boy who is living in occupation, a boy from Sevastopol. That's all they said about him. So a very nice boy, and it was very funny because Putin presented himself in a very stupid way. This was a very simplistic situation, an elementary illustration, but this is made normal when people who think about themselves that they're good Russians, when they attempt to make news. Do you understand what reality they are coming up with? It's just a small remark, very simplistic. I will definitely find it and add it to my presentation. So, torture psychological element was never singled out as a first-rate one, although the common sense and clinical observation inform us that any act of torture is accompanied with psychological suffering. Moreover, torture may be psychological and not necessarily be accompanied with physical pain. Nevertheless, torture may result and results in disastrous harm to the victim. We're talking about legal terms here. So these culpable persons know about that perfectly. we do not belong to the number of those culpable individuals. Therefore, we use self-observation for us to understand what's happening to us in this context. Moving on to practical side, our situation is made more complicated by the fact that a lot of us, for example, I, in whose opinions I bear, we quite often we feel that we are doing not enough. I don't know how you feel that way, but I often catch myself thinking this way. Probably we will be made happy only when Ukraine is victorious, and then we will feel that we somehow contributed to gaining that victory. And it's extremely important and valuable to understand what's happening within our society. The greater personal contribution we feel that we make, the better it makes us feel and will make us feel after the victory. You know all about PTSD, about crisis response. All of this relates to our victory, doing everything just as much and so qualitatively, everything that we can exert influence on. I'm not going to repeat what's been said today. Still, what is the context that this is setting to all that I mean to say? We believe and we know that victory is important. However, more often than not, we quite often feel helpless. We know, we believe, but for some reason, we still are overwhelmed with negative emotions. It's a very important question. What causes this helplessness? For example, if we exert every effort possible, we do all we can, we exert our influences and still we feel helpless. And at this point, I would like to ask you to have a look at yourselves as a target. I'm sorry to say that, but that's exactly what you have to do. We are a target to the attacks of helplessness from informational spaces, for example. So how does it make you feel if you look at the situation through this lens? When we are torn asunder by things that contradict each other every day, 25 times. And this is done not only by occupiers, unfortunately. So what does that lead to? What context does that leave us in? Critically important it is for us to understand that war crimes are being committed, that tortures are being committed. We understand that this is happening and we cannot stop the stream of deaths and tortures. We understand that these contradictions and controversies keep bombarding us. Let's keep moving. A lot of people have a great number of other feelings like anxiety, worry, which overwhelms and overcomes and stupefies the whole of our body. I'm not going to enumerate all of these sensations, what belongs to this body, but I would like you to consider helplessness. A lot of unfair stories, dramatic stories that I was able to touch upon during the last 10 years, they disclose that one of the most ruinous sensations is helplessness, which is interpreted by victims and survivors as a failure, fiasco. They feel drained, they cannot make sense, they don't have any cognitive realization, they cannot resist what is overcoming them. And this is very important to understand. For example, let us turn to Protasevich case. This Belarusian case should help us understand more soberly and very clear parallels concerning what's happening in us. It's always easier to go through other people's cases. It's not so painful, at least. This is my understanding. At least for me, it's easier to think along these lines. Because I don't know this man. So this Belarusian case, crime against Protasevich, was committed openly and blatantly in the eyes of the whole society, and everyone was able to see the updates and developments, and we understand that torture was applied to him. It was made visual to the community of free Belarus in order to break down the individual. And another important element in the case of Protasevich, he was detained together with his girlfriend, and I personally have no doubts that she was also tortured, and this was also one of the factors to exert influence on Protasevich too. So you can just imagine that situation as an experiment, for example. What kind of helplessness he must have been feeling when he was told what's going to be done to her or what may be done to her, just as an experiment. I think that you know it quite well, because people quite often recount the same testimonies. Because we can speak about trauma in retrospect only with full confidence. When 2 years have passed since the time of act, I have to say that Protasevich has been broken down. It's not a psychosocial aspect that I'm taking, but it's a factual thing. What this man used to do and what he's doing right now. I do not aspire to say that I'm a strong clinicist in his case, but anyway, these are conclusions that we can make. So this case was also followed by the Civil Society of Belarus. So both Protasevich and the Civil Society, they keep existing. However, none of them can implement the potential, they cannot fulfill themselves. So this is what torture against Protasevich was meant for. So when we speak about his case, the main idea that we have to establish is a motive. Remember, when we document, we cannot just come to the court when we don't know for sure, specifically, and we cannot reflect that in the clinical picture and its consequences, and we cannot identify what the motive was, what the aim pursued was for the panel of judges or the judge to make sense of that wherever we are filing this case, then it's impossible for us to achieve justice. Because torture always pursue a particular motive. Breaking down Protasevich was a condition, prerequisite, in order to fulfill the task, which was in the fact that the people who wanted to fight for the democracy in Belarus was aimed at. And we remember how they were fighting gently and tenderly. I'm not being sarcastic right now. One survivor, and the whole society was deactivated. This society, the community of people, they were so numerous. There were not just hundreds, there were many more. That's exactly the way that in the contemporary world wars are started and the different regimes are strengthened. In simple terms, respective conditions are created in order to start committing massive crimes. Torture, something that used to be individual, something that, just like I read to you the definition from the convention, which is still in place right now and in common circulation and legally applicable, at least in our judicial adjudication. So this was something personal. Right now, a personal case has become an instrument to exert influence on the whole nation's peoples, the whole governments. So here we can also mention what's taking place in Israel at the moment as we speak. However, our time is now limited. I would also like to offer a couple of definitions of tortures formulated by our censor from Spain, who is very well versed in this topic and who keeps sharing a lot of his experience with Ukrainian professionals. He gathered all that, well, maybe not gathered, but he constructed and made sense of that on the basis of numerous and rigorously collected testimonials of the survivors. So this new alternative definition was named by him as lessons selected from people's life stories. So he made sense of that and he provided several formulations and statements. Unfortunately, they are non-traditional, non-conventional. They're not included in the international convention. Still, they can be really grateful, helpful to us in our work. It doesn't matter whether they are part of international conventions. At our stage, I think that later on we will create precedents. We will finalize all of these respective international legal documents, but right now we need to get and gain facts, and in this respect we have to keep collaborating with each other. So these unconventional definitions presented by Paolo very well describe what the Protasevich case illustrates. So definition 1, for example, take it. Torture is manipulating an individual with the help of terror caused by inflicting pain and harm, by caused to bodily functions, manipulating time, setting, pursuing the goal of causing terror, fear, psychologically break down the person, gain some information, get some necessary gains. So torture is experienced as both physical, intellectual, and emotional struggle that the survivor experiences that leaves indelible impressions on this human being, usually as a feeling of guilt, shame, repeated memories, and pain in the body. In essence, that's exactly something that you keep seeing in your work. But when it is described by somebody in a living clinical language, substantial language, corroborated with a lot of experience, I think it would be much easier for the judges even to lean on. And for us, it's extremely necessary to be guided by such conclusions. Another definition that is also offering, all of them are complementary to each other. Torture is the relationship between two human beings characterized by violation of the feeling of dignity, and characterized by the lack of respect and autonomy expressed in absolute power, control, and forcing control and power, and complete suppression of the freedom of another individual. And the victim is forced to play an active role in their own suffering, being forced to act against their own will, and also forced to act in self-betrayal. So the victim is completely helpless. You see, this is the end of the definition. Thinking back to Protasevich's case, you see, I like psychotherapists because they're so clever. Another definition offered by him, and very popular indeed, at the individual level, torture is any intentional act, regardless of the method or methods selected, which is to move in and destroy the basic beliefs of the victim in order to destroy the constellation which represents the human's identity. We're not talking about the national identity, we're talking about the self, the ego principle, the destruction of that within the victim. I beg your pardon? And depriving this individual, that is to say the survivor, of human dignity and the feeling of belonging to the rest of the humanity, so severing these connections. At the social level, this is the continuation of this definition. At the social level, torture is a social institute of power and domain. That is demonstration, like in the animal kingdom, when primates dominate over each other. Punisher or executionist is part of the system of torture, which guarantees and develops and represents this immunity, while the victim is a representation of the whole society. And the messages of all of these tortures are aimed at the tortured. So those who are silent in embracing the status quo, those who are passive onlookers and passerby, they are also affected by everything committed in terms of this torture, because they are passive in their observation. I should also have to say that I haven't read this book from cover to cover as I was supposed to do that, as all of us, and by the way, I recommend you this evening. I strongly recommend you to read this book. I thought that I was only thinking along these lines, but now there are very few researchers and explorers of torture and terrorism, because this is interrelated. Right now they're developing the area of speaking about in favor of the fact that torture is also another instrument to exert influence on the whole society. So now there are some developments that we can fall back on, and we have to think about what's happening within the whole society, and we have to think in this context as well, we as the community, regardless of the influences dropping on us from on top or elsewhere, we always have to look at the picture in a broader sense. We mustn't lose sight of the context. In our case, when I said that this is the way that wars are launched and unleashed, but in our case, the war is already ongoing. It's already 10 years since it was started, and I very much hope that very soon it will take us to victory. In our case, the war is ongoing.
Останній, явно програючи на полі бою, проникає всередину нашого обложеного міста. Ну так, як пам'ятаєте, там історії всього 4, да, про обложене місто, як там Борхес
You
писав.
probably remember Borges describing his besieged cities, something that they're trying to do in order to demoralize us, to destroy our willpower, to resistance. In fact, this is an epic story the reality is the way that it is. The army is standing. What's happening within our society? This poison permeates us within and it begins to destroy the whole society from within. Let's get back to helplessness. I asked you how frequently you feel helpless, and I think this is something that refers to the people who are in the battle zone, in the hostilities area. All of these experiences, once again, are caused by violent human disorders, reputational attacks, observing extrajudicial investigations, lack of access to justice, even not providing medical assistance to the heroes of Ukraine. Once again, I can keep going and going, but it will take a lot of time.
So we're talking about many different things, about people being held in detention. It's the information attacks. That brings me to feel helpless. And then we start understanding that as a norm. Like, it's not the time, it's the war. And these are the things that are abnormal become normal. If I go now into the social and legal language, if we allow these non-democratic mechanisms, violation of human rights, and I'm speaking as a human rights defender as well, having the tragedies that we had and where people were not punished, where do we come? How will then we be different from our people who suffered most? We will no, there will be no difference. We will be even weaker because we will have no one to lean against. They have us, those who suffered more, I mean. If we fall, what do we get? Nothing. It's Russia. Okay, so I'm talking like Irina Farion. God forbid. I'm already afraid of these comparisons. No, I'm not that radical. No. I will start now talking about these things that this is aimed at destroying our civil society, but we cannot speak like that before we get the proof, before we have a substantiated case and we understand the motives. And I don't have that. I have nothing to go to court with. But what I would like to highlight is that our psyche, well, here we are passive witnesses, but we will feel helpless. We will have generalized fear, freezing, which is very similar to the crimes that we have already seen. We all perfectly know about PTSD. We understand that complex PTSD is worse, especially if a lot of people have it. I also have a question for you. Can we treat people in the situation of a continuous threat inside our society? Not external, but internal. I would like to compare it to what people feel when they're tortured, this kind of helplessness. You remember one of the formulations said that people cannot use themselves as a strength, as something to lean against. I think Imka also mentioned that. But when we have no shelter, bomb shelter or any other kind of shelter, this leads us to the situation of loss of feeling helpless and to this learned helplessness. And it's not that we ourselves make such choices. We start teaching our children to do it. Don't go there, don't get there, be silent, sit down, and so on. And people's reputations are abused. And there's no trust because trust is the basis for the connections between people and the foundation of their union. In the situation of war, I mean, how can we treat people in such conditions when we don't have that?
Як от повітря, да? Ну, ми не можемо від
This
цього
is something
відмовитись,
that we need,
але
just like we
можливість
need air.
зберегти
We
засади
need
демократії
to
всередині
preserve
нашого
democracy,
суспільства заради
democratic
фізичного
foundations in our
існування,
society,
фізичного виживання,
for our physical
довговічного,
survival
навіть не
and
здоров'я, а
psychological,
взагалі
mental,
існування
not even health, but just
життя в себе,
existence.
да,
I mean,
де
the
ми
existence of
можемо бути
ourself,
бути вільними
our
і робити
ego,
якісь
where we can
вибори,
be
а
free
не
and make
перетворитися на
choices
біороботів.
rather than become
Ми
biorobots.
зараз маємо усвідомлювати, що
We
це
need to
надважлива
understand
задача.
that
Ми
this
не
is a
маємо
huge
бути
task that we're
байдужими. Тобто
facing.
це навіть не
We
про юридичні
cannot
речі. Це
be
от просто хочеш жити, хочеш дихати.
just the people who don't care. This is not even
Забезпечити
legal.
правосуддя і
It is
дотримуватися
something
всіх
that we need if we want to
законних
live,
вимог
if we
до
want to
інших наших
survive.
співгромадян.
Yeah, and this is about justice to everyone who is kept in captivity or in detention. This is what I wanted to tell you. I wish we could have more time. I wish it could be a discussion with a lot of people. I have a lot of ideas, mind you, so let's get together and do something together. We have a lot of clever people in our team. Thank you.